Great. Well, very, very warm welcome to you all. Wonderful to see some familiar faces, some old friends I haven't seen for quite some time, and of course, many new faces. It's always a joy. Thank you so much for joining us. And before Amy and I start, I just introduce Amy because it's really a pure delight and honor to be here with Amy. So I'm going to just read a little bit about Amy. Amy Elizabeth Fox is the CEO and co-founder of Mobius Executive Leadership, a transformational leadership firm serving Fortune 500 companies and top-tier professional services firms. With over 2 decades of experience, she has designed and led executive programs that integrate psychology, organizational development, and the expressive arts. Under her leadership, Mobius has built a global network of more than 300 practitioners focused on cultivating adaptive agility, personal mastery, and systemic change. She is also a prominent voice in trauma-informed leadership, co-leading a certification program in partnership with Thomas Hübl. Her work bridges the fields of business, healing, and human development. Well, that's a wow. Amy.
Sounds a lot more foreboding than I hope I am.
Amy, thanks so much for being here.
What a joy, Nicholas.
Uh,
Yeah, and really a delight. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening. It's so wonderful to see so many friends on the call. And I look at the names and the faces and think about the years of walking together that are behind this call for Nicholas and I, of course, but for also us with many of you. And you can really feel there's a movement afoot to rehumanize the workplace and return love to the center of enterprise. And grateful that we're all part of that walk together. Very grateful.
Beautiful. Hallelujah.
Mm.
So we thought we'd actually just begin with a short kind of invocation, call it a prayer if you like. So I invite the highest presence, the highest intelligence, to flood us with your grace, to open our hearts, our souls, to feel the community between us and life, that we may be touched and inspired during this precious time together.
May our field of entwined intention leave our hearts soft in a hard time, light-filled in a dark time, joyous in a heartbreaking time, and resilient in a shaky and fearful time, that we may be resource to the world in this moment of its turning.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Amy.
You too. Beautiful.
So, and just to give some context to everyone, both Amy and I really devote everything we can to development that embraces 2 paths, whether we think of them as up and down or parallel. I call them awakening and healing. You call them vertical and shadow work, trauma-informed work. And our intention is to really touch on both during this time together. And within the evocative title that I felt I somewhat bravely suggested of restoring the temple as an extraordinary metaphor that I know we're both deeply devoted to. So
can I comment on that for 1 second?
Yeah.
It feels brave because of the structural split in the culture between the secular and the sacred. And I think both of our work and many people on this call are committed to the rebridging of those strands of life. And I think the notion of putting the holy back in the center of our lives and in the center of the global process is the impetus that causes us to care about healing and awakening and restoration side by side. So I do think it's brave, but hopefully only briefly brave.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And what's so clear to me, and more also in my personal journey, is that what I see in myself and in all the leaders I work with is that there are whole parts of us that went offline through hurt, through not being held enough. And those parts are deep in our nervous system, they're deep in our hearts. And both in my own journey, very much at the moment, as I even touch new layers of that, and in the work I do with leaders like you, I see that when we make it safe enough for those parts to be welcomed and felt, a quite different perceptual reality opens up. And that feels so important to me at the moment for leadership, because I think so many leaders, because of these numb, frozen parts, are operating in a limited, what I call perceptual bandwidth. And that's not enough now. We need to have the biggest, I also call it whole self intelligence, the biggest perceptual bandwidth open, which only happens to the degree that those hurt, frozen parts can be unfrozen through our warmth and welcome.
Yeah, that's gorgeous. And you said a number of things I could maybe amplify briefly. The perceptual range gets narrowed by that numbing, and the cognitive process, my interpretations of reality get more rigid and self-defended. So I get sealed off from learning. I'm not in a constant evolutionary journey of discovering life and reinterpreting and elevating my understanding and wisdom. And the relational domain gets shut down. So all the possibility for real closeness and intimacy and healing in the workplace gets denuded by the fact that I don't feel myself and I can't feel you. So there's a truncation of intelligence, one could say,
Mm,
that I believe is correct. You're correctly pointing to. It's reached its threshold in which leaders can function with that diminished capacity because the demands on everybody are amplifying in speed, in change demand, in managing incredible transformational processes externally. So we've reached the ceiling in which people can tolerate the gap between what they could potentially intuit and understand and offer and what they're currently capacitized to offer, which is why I think healing work is the most essential dimension of leadership development at this point. We don't need more skills and frameworks. We need an unnumbing process. We need a restorative process that allows people's natural multidimensional intelligence to come back online.
yeah.
The second thing you said is the degree of numbing, and maybe I would add the degree of regression with
Mm,
which senior leaders are walking around functioning and shaping society would shock someone who hadn't had exposure to it. Um, Thomas has this phrase where he says, hurt people hurt people. That's the world we're living in, and that's the world that we see. So there's an urgency in my mind to this healing work, not just as a personal intervention and an unlock for an individual executive, but as a strategy for rewiring the agreements in which society and cultural architecture are based.
right, absolutely. It's so ironical because we've never had a more urgent need for high-level critical thinking. And yet most organizational cultures do everything that suppresses that in many ways. Even the fact that most people will tell you, or many people anyway, that they do their best thinking during exercise. That's interesting. But the full, and then I often say to people, so you know how that feels when your body is alive and open. Everyone says, yes, yes, I know how that feels. And then if I ask, so what percentage of each day do you feel like that? It's like headstrong, a sort of a quiet 5% is, but, and then I said, but so that's what we've normalized, because I think that's very important to wake up to what we've normalized and to understand all the ways that compound the normalization.
Yeah, and that scarcity of depth practice
Mm,
creates a superficiality of discourse, which is self-reinforcing. So when I don't feel myself, I can't share my interiority in a way that would allow us to come into a kind of intimate coherence with one another. That's the precursor of genuine co-creation or collective intelligence. So we're robbing ourselves of our felt experience of life and its beauty and its joy and its yumminess, it's lusciousness, and we're
yes,
robbing one another of the intimacy of connection
right.
and the safe harbor for innovation. And so what's wonderful, I think, about the insights you're bringing and that we're dialoguing about is that more and more businesses are starting to understand the business cost of that numbing. And
That,
more leaders are starting to see they can't just continue chasing the next demarcation of prestige and status and fancy stuff. The
mm,
hollowness of that model of sort of following the social rules and grabbing for the next shiny toy,
mm.
it's transparent now to many people, and I think that is an opening or an opportunity for us, all of us as practitioners, to step into that invitation and offer some guidance on how people can begin to walk a path of internal development, or what whole person development, to use your language, or vertical development, what I might call it.
And it's kind of astonishing to see, like I work at a couple of top business schools. There is a tiny percentage of the teaching that is about what we're talking about, a tiny percentage. And there's something very wrong in that, I think. Um,
Yeah, and it mirrors the amount of airtime given to the conversation of the soul in modern culture.
right, right, right. And I think what we're both committed to is that the primary work initially of any person in leadership has to be their own inner work, so that they transmit. When I speak of leader as healer, I mean a leader who is transmitting an embodied, heart open, coherent energy field. And part of coherence is that language and embodiment and emotion become one. Because what I observe so often is that there's something happening here, and then speaking happens out here. And everyone responds out here, so that we have a culture that increases the disconnection rather than that brings the coherence within which higher intelligence, what you named as collective intelligence, can flow. And sometimes it's as simple as a leader, because of their inner work, being able to say in a meeting, just a moment, let's just acknowledge the anxiety in the room. Let's just acknowledge it and take a breath with it and normalize it. It's totally normal. I feel it. I know everyone else is feeling it. Let's just take a moment and relax with it. Because my experience when that happens is there's a visible physical change, and then a whole lot of new ideas can start to come in. Because if we're sitting there like that, I'm not allowed to say I'm anxious. There's no chance of higher levels of thinking really emerging.
Yeah, and it's beautiful how you describe the leader with an open heart and a coherent field and the transmission of safety into the room. I think that is the aspiration of all of this healing work, but it's worth painting the picture of the inverse. What's
Hmm.
happening now is you have a leader walking into that room whose inner child is still in a state of terror and isolation and hopelessness. And that lens of felt neurological experience that walks with them for decades becomes the default setting with which they're meeting life and interpreting conversation and making meaning of events. And you add that to sit that person next to a 3-year-old who was beaten and doesn't have a fundamental wiring of life as safe, life as expansive, life as for you. And that person's going to act in self-interest and self-protection and not disclose very much. Excuse me. And that person sitting next to somebody who went to war and has never done PTSD work, and they're in a state of shock and shutdown and saturation of emotion.
Mm.
They can't take in any new information. So
Yeah.
each of these hurts shape an entire psyche as an interpretive system, as a relational system, as a source or not of hope and possibility and fresh wind. And we're operating in such a constrained, contracted, and traumatized zeitgeist that we don't even understand how far from the open-hearted, coherent
Yes.
transmission we are.
Yes.
On one day in one of my programs, I asked people, just make a list of the ways you numb yourself, just to cause a sort of moral inventory, a sort of rigorous looking at how we're all constantly in micro and macro addictions, hacking our own felt experience or ensuring that we're not in self-contact. And the journey from that inventory to the strength to face whatever it is we're holding and have held for a long time and let it be cradled and let it be integrated and metabolized, to the freedom on the other side of that healing process. That's the walk we're talking about, I think. And I think that's what you mean by leader as healer, at least in part.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I find it also fascinating. And just to give an example, because most leaders are also, their focus is on fixing something out there.
Mm.
They present an issue. And if you or I or any of our team say, okay, but let's actually look inside. So I had a lovely example recently with a CEO in charge of 100,000 plus people, very successful man. And the issue was, what happens when someone comes to him? How is the relational field? And he immediately said, I don't like people to come too close.
Mm.
Okay. All right. So, and he really trusts me, and we have a very open field together. So well, let's look inside. What's happening
Mm.
inside you that makes you go like that? And to cut a long story short, he quite quickly gets to, well, I feel fear. Fear of what? I fear they may really see me and see that I'm actually not as good as they think I
Mm.
am. But then there was another moment of revelation where he said, I'm just giving a very short version. He said, do you know, I realize I have never let anyone come really close to me.
Yeah, that's the truth.
So beautiful. So beautiful. That's exactly this, a step in this kind of healing work that we're talking about. Just to bring the feeling of that reality. Age 58, the first time he realized
It reminds me of two stories, maybe to share. One
that.
is at some point in most of my programs, I ask people, if you're so numb, you probably don't feel when you need support, or you don't feel when to ask for emotional connection, or said another way, you don't let people close to you. What could you ask people for by way of emotional support?
Mm,
Every group I've ever asked that question to, of some of the most senior leaders on the planet, can only come up with two.
mm,
Someone can hug me and someone can listen to me. We're completely starved of a relational vocabulary of entwined, interdependent communal life.
yes,
We operate in really pandemic isolation.
I agree. Absolutely.
Um, and I think most people, when you name that, they can feel the poignancy and pain of that. And just to include us, I don't think we as practitioners are immune from that. I think many of us went into this profession because we like to work alone. And we spend most of our time working one-on-one and not in community. And so for me, the devotion to this path includes a devotion to living in Sangha, walking in community, being an active and committed friend, and pushing the frontier of the primacy the society puts on autonomy and resilience, which basically means I don't need you, out of the way to say, I deeply need you. I need you to cradle me when I cry. I need you to dance with me. I need you to tell me your stories of wisdom and hard-earned learning. I need you to open my eyes to what I don't see. We need each other. And this premise that somehow a leader lives in and ought to operate in a self-sealed isolation is just antithetical to high performance.
Completely. Absolutely. Yes. And just to add to what you say, I think we could also say that many of us went into and do the work we do. Maybe it was more unconscious at first, but certainly it's very conscious now that we know we need to heal as well. And I know, are devoted to also going to those most hurt places in ourselves, in the right environment, with the right support. And I know, and I speak from very live experience, that every time I do that, every time I'm touching, and it's not easy, but we kind of know we need to do it and we have the right support, that afterwards, what's so interesting is my whole perception gets clearer and clearer and clearer. Meaning when I'm working with a group or I'm working with an individual, there's a clarity of perception of the whole multidimensional field. So that in itself proves to me how important that inner work is and why leaders need to do that. So they have the most open, heart connected perceptual field as well.
Yeah, and to say a mystical thing to amplify what you just said, we both have the privilege of spending time with a modern teacher named Patrick Hunter, and Patrick would say, it's all operating at a vibrational level. And so
Mhm.
there's not just what I perceive, but there's also what I transmit.
Exactly.
And the beauty that a field that's more open and in touch with the numinous or um, the celestial has the possibility to invoke a blessing field that operates of its own potency, um, and is a moistening of the field of self-exploration. Maybe I could
Yes.
say it that way.
Yeah,
And
beautiful.
part of the reason to work as deeply as many of us on this call have done in our own inner work as practitioners is not just to refine our ability to sense and perceive and diagnose what's going on, as you said, in a very multidimensional, nuanced, and precise way, but it's also to invoke that blessing field into the room,
Yeah.
uh, and
Yeah.
let it work its miracles.
People are often saying, are you going to write another book? And I don't plan to, because it's quite a tortuous process. But I do have the title.
Oh, tell.
If I write a new book, working title will be To Be a Blessing, the Highest Calling of Leadership.
Oh, that's very beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it's clearer and clearer to me, and I know to you, and to many leaders. Actually, I say this too, that the highest offering of a leader is your vibration. It's what you are transmitting
Mm,
through your presence, hence the need for
mm,
ongoing work.
That's very beautiful, Nicholas. And certainly as practitioners, that ought to be our collective aspiration.
Okay.
Um, I want to say something hopeful. I think it is a natural orientation to be a blessing to others.
Yes,
And
yes,
one of the things that I notice in any group I run is once people have sort of melted a little bit of their heart protection, you don't have to teach them how to extend themselves to each other. You don't have to teach them how to approach each other when somebody's shaky or fragile. or how to affirm somebody's strengths and beauty, or how to listen deeply. You just have to get rid of the social conditioning that interferes with that natural process of generosity and mutuality, which is to say we're hardwired to be a blessing to each other. And I think that's a gorgeous thing to know, and tremendously hopeful. And it doesn't take that much time to deconstruct the social conditions that are the constraining force against that kind of amplified unconditional love. Did I freeze or did we lose Nicholas? Anybody know? Ted, can you still see me?
I think we lost Nicholas. I
Yeah,
see.
we
Okay.
lost Nicholas.
All right,
Lost
well,
Nicholas.
we'll pause for a second. So great to see everybody.
Me
Went
too.
to the field
Amy, this is so rich, so
Oh,
rich.
thanks, Kath. Thanks.
So beautiful, Amy.
Oh, how wonderful.
It's an important conversation.
It's totally heartwarming. Thank you.
Oh, how wonderful.
Yeah, it feels so enlivening to feel the space come alive between all of us. There's so much movement and energy, and it feels like a breath, like a big inhale and a big exhale. Yeah,
How delicious.
yeah.
I hear so many themes that I feel or agree with you are so important for upper echelon corporate government, governance, everything to help us move through this time.
I really feel like this conversation has an urgency that I've never felt in the 20 years of doing this work because of everything we're seeing. And I think this community has some of the antidote. And so I feel it's very empowering to be together, and it's very important to keep pushing the frontier of our collective understanding, I think.
We have to. We have to. And when you were saying earlier that the holy is back in the halls of high-level decision making, that couldn't be more important because it's been lost in recent years.
Yeah, and what we didn't say, but that comment makes me want to be explicit about, is there's a close connection between the holy and the ethical.
Yeah, that was 1,000%. I think, yeah, when there's no daylight between what you just said and how I view that. And why I'm glad to see. I mean, I like your language of the holy. I tend to speak in the language and just say, in God we trust. But I'm glad to see God and the holy are back.
Yeah, having a renaissance. I think maybe I'll just add one more piece, which is there's a devotional dimension to what we're talking about, which is asking people, Jesus says, you have to ask yourself, who has your heart? Who are you working for? And I think any of us now who want to be part of this restorative wave have to reconceive of our engagement with life as working for higher restoration and not working for the immediate client context we might find ourselves in. And I think the minute you make that pivot, you're emboldened to say things that you might not say otherwise, and you have divine authority to say things that you might not say otherwise. And that authority, in a way, insulates you from what would otherwise come as a backlash, or at least that's been my experience.
1,000%. And we need that. The short-term returns offered through political risk and gain, through stock markets, through business cycles, they're just damaging they over challenge the process. And we need to shift to a longer timeline.
I once had I'll just tell a quick anecdote. I've never had a strategy for Mobius because I've always sort of tried to follow divine signs. That was my strategy. And at year 17, the company got big enough that my team was in rebellion, that we didn't have a strategic plan. And I finally yielded and said, okay, we'll bring in a strategic planner. We did a 3-hour session in which she asked me all these extremely traditional goal questions about how do you measure impact and who's your desired client and blah, blah, blah. And I just kept saying, like, I don't think about it like that at all, at all. And then finally, in massive frustration, she said, "How will you know if it works?" And I said, "On Judgment Day, God will be pleased with us."
That's
It's a
great.
good answer.
And
Moral
I'm
credit.
responding to your question about short term. Like, we have to think in eternal time. What's our contribution to eternity?
I
Not
agree.
not what's the latest profit.
And it's legacy, and legacy is a big word. I mean, we speak
Well,
about it sometimes.
legacy is
It's not.
even too self-oriented. I don't think it's legacy. I think it's devoted contribution.
Combination. I think legacy can be a motivator, and devoted contribution can be an outcome of that motivator.
Fair
Because
enough.
sometimes it's not in your time, but it is
Fair.
what you leave, and it's proof of the integrity and vision of your vision and actions.
Can't do it.
Hooray, we have Nicholas back.
I listen, my computer just suddenly switched off. Most
The energy was too strong, my dear.
I'm sure you've had an amazing Monica. I'm now Hadassah, my wife. So if you can spotlight us again, Monica.
Of course, Dana, you are the host. If you could please spotlight. Thank you.
That sounded like a very rich conversation. Hi, Amanda.
Hi.
Wow.
Hey, I think we're there.
No. Oh,
No?
you have to spotlight Amy and Hadassah.
Yes, you.
Yeah, we're on the
Yeah.
screen.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Here
Okay.
we are.
I'm seeing everyone, which is lovely.
Good. Good.
Yes. So where shall we go, Amy? Shall we move towards what I know is such a deep devotion core of both of us, which is what I might call the awakening, you might call the vertical development.
That would be very timely because that's the topic we were just on.
So please lead us in there.
Yeah, I mean, I sometimes describe the work of personal and collective transformation as a cross, and in the vertical dimension, there's the sort of descending dimension of that path, which is trauma work, it's deep healing, it's shadow work, and there's the expansion of consciousness, or the upward movement into a state of closer relationship to divine guidance and receptivity to divine grace, as you said in our opening prayer. And the practices that enable us to get silent enough and spacious enough to be instruments of receiving communication from etheric fields, subtle fields, higher intelligence, that process of hollowing out and granting your heart to be used as an instrument of higher intelligence is, I think, for practitioners, the difference between one who is doing consultative work and one who's doing restorative work. And then there's a horizontal dimension to the work, which is really social change. It's really cultural architecture. It's organizational culture work, where you're trying to debunk the dysfunctional and trauma-informed architecture of the ways we relate individually, dyadically, on teams, in organizations, and in society at writ large, and move them towards something that's more wholesome, more life-affirming, and more vitalized with the sacred. And so in a way, it's artificial to talk about them as if they are two independent processes. They're utterly interwoven, interlaced circles of intervention and activity. And as you said so beautifully, Nicholas, each part of our heart that heals and integrates makes more room in our being for light. And the more light that we carry, the more that light can have influence and impact in the world. And so I think one cannot afford to be a transformational practitioner any longer without devoting to study with a true spiritual master, supervision with a really important, informed clinician, time in community to stretch our own abilities to be intimate and close and transparent and naked with each other, but also just to support each other, because the work is hard. And the stories that we receive are often wrenching. It's unbelievable what the human spirit lives through, and somehow stays intact through. But if you want to be a repository for those stories and let them reverberate in your field, you also need processes of body work and tantric work and healing work to continue to have the resilience to stay at the frontier of that process. So I think I love the question, and I know both of us are very also fascinated by the richness of music and art and beauty as resources for nourishing the soul. And you can't separate the poetics from the contemplative, from the devotional arts. It's all, manna from heaven in a way, to say at a Passover time. So yeah, I'm curious how that resonates with you.
So many rich things you've said, Amy. So a few things that come to me. First of all, that I've long felt that in throwing out so much of religion, which in many ways we probably needed to do, we really threw the baby out with the bathwater. So we've created this kind of secular ceiling. And at the core of that secular ceiling is I as a separate individual. So already this is where the two paths or tracks most obviously intersect, is that when our heart starts to open. I had a beautiful example of this last night. I was supervising two of my team, two men, and their hearts just got more and more open. And I realized I was sitting there with a huge smile on my face. Because when that happens, we are already in the presence of something much more than our separateness. So I think the heart is totally core to this. And as I think the Sufis say in a very poetic way, the longest road we will ever walk is the road from our head to our heart. I think that's an amazing sentence. And then what also comes to me is that separate, resolutely defined I has a lot of difficulty in bowing. And as we move towards what we can call the sacred, or towards the presence of the numinous, which can happen in so many different ways, there is a natural inclination to just really bow, And I feel we've lost that so much. And interestingly, until there is some opening like that, people will actually resist, will argue against, no, I don't want to bow to anything. I'm giving up my power, and so on and so forth, because that's what it feels like to the separate self. That if I really bow to something much more than me, I'm somehow giving something up. But actually, in the bigger context, that's exactly what needs to be happening.
You said so many rich things, and maybe I'll just amplify again a couple of them. One, the movement from self-orientation and self-protection to the movement of collective aspiration or collective possibility is part of the journey that this time asks all of us to take, I think. And the separate sense of self doesn't want to make that merging, doesn't want to make that state of communion, because it feels very threatening to the instinct to self-protection and to self-orientation. So part of the spiritual development path is, I think, the melting that you're describing so beautifully. And we can see all over society the damage that's done by personal ambition and personal accumulation and personal self-protection.
Yes.
That was one thought that I had. The second thought that I had is sort of to bring in another trauma dimension, which is many people have been hurt earlier in life by people in positions of authority, their parents, their teachers, their clergymen, and that hurt relationship to what you call bowing down or to granting somebody power over you that hurt relationship then gets copy pasted into our projection of the divine. And so it's a journey, I think, of self-discovery and healing to be able to freshly and unapologetically grant your authority to someone to guide you as a teacher and to turn your life over to a higher power. You know, that's the sort of most essential part of a 12-step program, right? Is getting to the quality of surrender that allows you to bow down. But the precursor to surrender is either I'm on my knees so overwhelmed that I know I need help,
Yes.
or I've wired such safety in me that I can grant that with a sense of the other side of that conversation being benign. And I know for myself, in my own spiritual development, there are days where I feel God as a luminous source of love and endless holding. And there are times when I'm in my own trauma field where it feels utterly unsafe and I feel more comfortable in self-protection and self-reliance. And that's, you know, that will oscillate till it doesn't, I guess. But the notion that it's a long journey, I think, is important because I find, as I know you do, many executives would like to take this as a, 1 hour pill on a lunch break and hope it can be handled by that one short seminar. My experience is quite contrary to that. It's an endless unwinding, and it's a lifetime of bowing down, and it's
exactly.
choice after choice to put yourself on the mat and dedicate yourself to your practice and have the humility of just endlessly unwinding what appears to be layer on layer of some of the same themes, some of the same hurts. The process is a recapitulative one. So you hit the same terrain again and again, but in a deeper dimension.
Exactly.
And so you have to have in a way, you have to grant a lot of patience to yourself in that process, not to feel like that it's not moving forward or not to judge the pace of the process. All that frenzy that we live in modern society can't be imported to a depth process, because a depth process moves in sacred time. It doesn't move in worldly time.
Yes. Yeah, and I love what you said about cycles, because it seems to me, speaking from my experience, that we each have like core topics, as it were.
Exactly.
And it sometimes we might think, oh, I'm touching that again. Yeah, but actually that will be endless as we go gradually deeper. And it's important to recognize that. And also, I have a client, actually the one I was mentioning before, who every so often writes me in WhatsApp, Nicholas, is there really not a pill I could take to make this quicker?
Yeah, and I also think to have reverence for how painful trauma work is.
Yeah.
That's not just that's not just resistance or callousness. That's somebody saying this is hard. And I think you and I have done enough of our own shadow work to say, yeah, it is.
Absolutely. And also where the two tracks really intersect often is exactly when there is a sharing of the deepest vulnerability.
Mm.
And I always remember one of Thomas Hübel's great sentences, that our deepest vulnerability is our highest possibility.
Yeah.
And I think we both recognize that happening many times in ourselves and with our clients as well. So it all comes down often to making a safe enough space. And if it's not a safe enough space, to feel the unsafety, because that's what leads in time. And therefore, a theme I often talk about, which I know you do too in your way, is radical inclusion. That we need to create fields, whether it's in an individual or in teams, where exactly what is true can be included without trying to fix it or change it or make it go away. Even the most intractable stuckness, if we can really welcome it, it will start to melt. It will start to move in ways we cannot possibly plan or strategize.
Yeah. And I think we've so sanitized the ways that we talk about our lives that people are shocked at first to hear the level of struggle that people are in, the depth of what they've walked in their lives, and to build a cup that can receive the violence that people have lived through in many different dimensions, and the losses, the grief, and the overwhelm that many people walk in. So part of what we need to do as practitioners, I believe, is to not just open our hearts in compassion, but to get used to dancing with darkness, and get used to and able to invite in an uncensored way somebody to bring their raw felt experience of the darkest part of life to us. And then to enable people to tell their stories, to really say, this is my life, this is what I walked, this is how it lives in me now, this is what I need support around. And when we can move to the conversation that is that raw, then we have the possibility of real encounter, with one another and with the nature of where the light is hidden in that darkness.
Yes, absolutely.
Should we
So
take a
I'm-
question or two?
Yes, okay, sure, by all means, yes.
Beautiful Ted has his hand up.
Hi, Ted.
You have to come off mute, sweetheart.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated as not being a coach of big companies, but I've worked with individuals and families for 40 years, and what you're talking about is deeply touching to me as somebody who cares about the people that you're coaching when they go home into their families, wanting
Yes.
to bring what you're teaching into the realm of their own lives. And what you said earlier, Amy, was really touched me at a deep level. You said, when people come to me and they want support, two things, and after, I think you said 30 years or however many years you've been doing this, they said they ask for two things: they want a hug and they want to be listened to, right? And everything that the two of you have been talking about, it touches, I think, what all of us want, which is really to be listened to at a deep level. And the key is, for me, what creates that ability for me as a therapist for all these years? It's safety. You said in different ways, both of you said, to do this kind of deep revealing, you need to feel safe. You need to feel that somebody is really listening to you at a deep level, right? And I think that in many ways, I think in the work that I've done and the coaching that I've seen done by friends of mine, that there's a safety in the container that you two bring, that every one of you in this group brings. When you enter the room, the field you bring is one of respect that you bring, right? And the thing is that there's hidden in that, I think, the elements of safety that kind of go unnoticed and unacknowledged by the other people, which is, what are the agreements that we have to create this safety? What's a safe harbor mean? Where's it safe to be listened to? And the only thing I found in all the years I worked, I've done a lot of work with trauma. I've been an EMDR therapist for 25 years. I've seen thousands of people deep in trauma. And the only thing that really gives them the ability to touch into the depth is the feeling of safety that I bring and the safety I know that you two bring in your work, and everybody here does. And so what I found in all the years is in order to feel listened to, there needs to be some sense of a boundary, like we'll both get turns. And all you really need is to know that there's a structure of both of us are going to have equal time to be listened to here, right? And I just use a timer. Be a 2-minute timer for a 3-minute timer, just like, okay, you get a turn, I get a turn. And when the person knows they're going to get a turn without interrupting, boom, it's like magic. It's so simple. And everyone here, could try that and use it and go like in their own lives. Try it there. See, just being listened to and knowing that we're just going to get a turn. I'm probably taking too long, but I love you. I love you both a lot. I love our life. I love Patrick. And I just know that safety is the key here for all of us.
You didn't talk too long. You're a deeply wise being, and we're grateful for your being with us. And I just wanted to highlight one thing you said, Ted, and also maybe push the frontier of invitation to this dialogue. Exploring what makes up the composition of safety is one of the most important tasks before us as practitioners and healers. So you named a few things: my ability to deeply listen and receive someone else, my ability to create a structure that feels containing and trustworthy and predictable. But there's other things as well. There's many dimensions of safety. I mean, the one I was thinking of while you were speaking was sanctification? Will this space hold what I'm sharing in reverence as precious? There's also hopefulness. Does the practitioner communicate that even though we're going into a dark cave, we're going to come out the other side? And the only way to make that communication real is if you've done it yourself.
Exactly.
Your body tells them, yes, you can go there. And yes, I'll stay with you. And yes, there is another side, right? So I just wanted to highlight some of the themes you're bringing and invite all of us to keep this an active, fertile conversation. What are the strands of safety? Because the way psychological safety is being spoken about in organizational work right now is so superficial and so falls short of what actual safety requires. So I really appreciated the comments. I don't know, Nicholas, if you want to add more.
Beautiful. Actually, a word that comes to me as well is generosity. Like a generosity of care. I want to be with you, and I'm willing to be with you wherever you go. And that's only possible to the degree that I've been to many places in myself.
Yeah, that's gorgeous. That's right.
And when I ask leaders in groups, do you remember the leaders you've worked with who really listened to you, even for 1 or 2 minutes? Everyone knows who those leaders were. And I believe that touches something so primal in us, that when we're first born, other than our biological needs, our most primary need is that we look up at our caregiver or givers, and we see that they are relating to us. We see that they're feeling us in some way. And that's as true when we're an adult as when we were a newborn. And so another component of that I work with, and we all do, I think, is that the leader, it's an embodied presence. That safety is like a transmission from I'm really here, I'm really here. And we often think listening is that. And one of the core things I teach is no, listening is I'm here and I have a lot of space for you, a lot of space for you. So I think listening alone is a hugely important.
But there are two other features.
Skill. Go on. Yeah.
There are 2 features in what you just said that are worth naming if we're going to start getting a lexicon of safety. One is attunement.
Yes.
And the other is spaciousness, interior spaciousness to attend to the other. Like I'm clear enough inside myself, my attention can stay in a sustained way on someone else.
Yes.
Ted, thank you for inviting us to this dialogue. It's so important.
Thank you, Ted. Tivo, let's hear from Tivo.
Yeah, just first a heartfelt thank you for how you impact all of us. I feel warm in my heart and really connected at a soul level. So thank you for both of your work. I'm always pointing to both of you and people that I'm trying to influence to. What comes to me is, so I work in a, second largest biotech company in the world. So kind of rapid change, chaos, and I'm working with leaders and individuals. And I'm curious to get your wisdom around holding 2 things. One is, I think the bowing, I think that really touched me today, and I'll explore how to do that in my own corporate space, in my own role as a leader, as a coach, as a trainer, consultant. The other piece is the sort of grounded, confident verticalness. So also from martial arts, right? There's the beauty of Aikido to bow and to be gracious and simultaneously to be like a tree in the wind. So I'm curious how you hold the bowing and the ground and the depth and the solidity to hold, right, the fast pace of change and the trauma and the adversity and the small bandwidth that most people have in corporate space. And thank you again for your work.
Amy?
Well, Tivo, first of all, I just appreciate so much our ongoing dialogue on LinkedIn. I really treasure everything you share, and we read them very closely, just so you know. I mean, I think you said it in a way, like that's the balance, that you're trying to help people to slow down. The pace at which we're moving in life is unnatural and unhealthy and unsustainable and anti-intimate and anti-spirit. So just the act of saying to people, you have to take 3 or 4 days, you have to get off email, you have to come home to yourself before you can even start the process. That's the precursor. That's the yes that allows the process to then unfold. I think what you're pointing to is one of the dimensions of intervention is time. And that's right. And the second intervention is embodiment. Like we're floating above ourselves. T.S. Eliot has some line about this guy lives 8 feet from his body, and that's pretty much how we're all operating. So all the practices of which martial arts is one, and dance is another, and singing together is another. Anything that helps you to sort of re-anchor in the tissue and sinew of our bodies gives us access to more intelligence, as Nicholas said at the beginning of the call. There's more to say, but in a brief answer, I would just say, yes, what you said is very important. and we're trying to dance those two together. Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you, Tivo. Yes, also for all you write. It's always beautiful to read. There's a very ancient wisdom saying which invites us to understand and experience that we need to go really slow in order to go really fast. And there's a profound wisdom in that. And I echo Amy's second point about the body, the coming home to the body. When I work with groups, we do some very simple somatic process, breathing, grounding, at the end of which people are often like, wow, I didn't know I could feel like this. And then what becomes important, and certainly in my work, is let's make this a moment by moment practice. And this is where the power of attention is super important. Because if I learn to pay attention to my body moment by moment, to my grounding, to my breathing, I'm already creating the beginning of what Amy calls spaciousness. So, but it needs to be a very deliberate, intentional practice for all of us, because otherwise we come up and out, and then we're lost. We are truly lost.
I just want to add one thing because it's such a lovely symbol of what we're talking about. On the second day of my programs, we do a very deep excavation of core fears and an integration of people's earliest hurts. And then we lay everybody down with a blanket and a pillow, and we have a 1-hour cello concert with a wonderful cellist. And I'm teaching them adult nap time or the importance of rest and integration, and I think of that hour as important in the curriculum as everything else we're doing, because we're in the habit of not pausing to metabolize life experience and listen to the whisper of beauty as an elevation and inspiration. So thank you for your question, Tiwa. Did we lose Jono? Jono, are you still here?
Yeah, I'm still here. Yeah.
Oh, I definitely wanted to invite you to comment, honey, if you had something to share.
Sure. I was gonna ask both of you to offer us some wisdom about the nature of non-verbal, somatically orientated safety work with leaders. Like how much different is that for you working with a leader than working with Gen Pop, let's say? Is it more important? Is it harder to orientate towards? I just wanted to kind of open that up for you guys to talk into around the body and the leader.
I mean, I think depending on the generation of leader that you're addressing, the level of dissociation from the body is going to be more or less. And younger leaders already often have some practice in their life that puts them in touch with a somatic felt experience of themselves. So it's a more radical intervention for a senior leader. And the notion of touch or holding inside of senior leader dynamics is very, very unusual. So one of the exercises I often do with senior leaders is I have them do hands-on healing with each other, where they sit in a group of 3 and each person takes a turn on the ground and the other 2 send light and love through their hands, either on the body or above the body. And I'm trying to debunk the notion that we're you know, even in the level of the body, we have to be separate and isolated. And you have to do it in a way that's calibrated to each person's safety to be touched or to be held or to be have contact made in that way. And I always feel, if I'm honest, Janu, that I'm on the edge of what a corporation can tolerate in that exercise, because it's still such a taboo touch in the workplace. So is that responsive for now?
Yeah, no, it's amazing, because that was my sort of niggling question is that in the game of safety, we've made touch unsafe, but touch seems to be the thing that gives people back safety.
100%.
So how do we work there?
Well, and then to say for practitioners to have as part of your walk as a therapist and a coach and a facilitator of transformation, receiving touch on a regular basis, I think is one of the most essential practices for our own re-inhabiting of ourselves, our own emotional depth, and our own joy. Yeah. Eros is an important fuel for this work. Yeah. Nicholas,
Yes.
you want to add anything?
Well, I would just simply say that I don't think we can overemphasize the importance of coming home to our bodies as a lifelong practice. And my experience or my whatever knowledge I may have after so many years about working with the body is that it's a process of coming down, 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 and ultimately right down into our pelvis and our base. Because from very early on, we lifted up out of there when life wasn't safe. And it's very literal. And it's very interesting sometimes when you work with somebody and they're willing to feel their fear, for instance, they feel safe enough. One consequence very often is they will say, oh, I suddenly feel my legs. I suddenly feel the ground. So there is even in that a coming down. I call it a coming home, really coming home. And that's a lifelong journey in my experience. It just gets deeper and deeper. And that is a foundation for everything. So I'm aware that we're at time, Amy, and just can't thank you enough for this. There's so much more we could talk about. So maybe we will do it again sometime. But thank you.
It would only be a joy, Nicholas. Thank you, everybody. What a treat.
Thank you. And maybe we just finish with a moment's quiet together, just to resonate with everything that's moving inside you.
And Deborah, if you want to reach out to us privately, we're happy to hear what your question was.
And I'm going to just take a moment to ring what we may think of as the temple bell. Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Nicholas. Thank you, everyone. Great to see you.